Well, today's show was supposed to be all about the awesome new features in software version 9, but that's not happening. The SEC has brought charges against Elon, and we'll dive into why and what this means. This is Tesla Tidbits episode number 454 for September 28th, 2018. It was a day like any other today when I got a notification on my phone that Tesla stock was down significantly. Opening my stock app and finding that in after-hours trading the stock was down in the mid-260s, I immediately thought, what in the world has happened? A quick check of my Twitter revealed the unfortunate news that the SEC has charged Elon with making false and misleading statements in connection with the now infamous tweet that he was considering taking Tesla private. We head to Electrek, where they posted the complaint in full, as well as Elon's response. I'm going to start first by saying the obvious, and that is that I am not a lawyer. I'm an IT security geek by trade, so the things I'm reading into this complaint may be way off base as a layman looking at legal matters. I encourage you to read the full complaint for yourself and draw your own conclusions as well. I'll start with the whole of the first section of the complaint, which makes the accusation. Quote, "This case involves a series of false and misleading statements made by Elon Musk, the chief executive officer of Tesla Inc., Tesla, on August 7, 2018, regarding taking Tesla, a publicly traded company, private. Musk's statements, disseminated via Twitter, falsely indicated that, should he so choose, it was virtually certain that he could take Tesla private at a purchase price that reflected a substantial premium over Tesla stock's then-current share price, that funding for this multi-billion-dollar transaction had been secured, and that the only contingency was a shareholder vote. In truth and in fact, Musk had not even discussed, much less confirmed, key deal terms, including price, with any potential funding source." End quote. So, first things first, at no point in the complaint is the word fraud ever mentioned. Trust me, I searched it. Maybe this is my lack of lawyerness, and by saying false and misleading, this means fraud, but I'd think that they'd say it pretty plainly if that's what they were charging. I believe fraud carries with it an intent to harm, and because of that, I think that this is why that they chose not to use it. Elon's shown time and again he intends to do the right thing, and I think they know they couldn't win a case if that was the accusation. Establishing that, we have an accusation of false and misleading claims, and this case seems to center around a few key points. Firstly, that at no time was the $420 price point ever discussed with the potential investor or investors. Secondly, that no formal agreement was ever reached with said investor or investors. Thirdly, that Elon flat out didn't know there were things that just couldn't be done the way that he was assuming. And lastly, that Elon failed to properly notify the NASDAQ that a public release of material information was imminent. We'll begin with the price. We'll inject the lone bit of humor into this story here, where we find out from the complaint that, as many assumed, the price chosen was indeed because it was a marijuana reference. From the complaint, quote, "According to Musk, he calculated the $420 price per share based on a 20% premium over that day's closing share price because he thought 20% was a standard premium in going private transactions. This calculation resulted in a price of $419, and Musk stated that he rounded the price up to $420 because he had recently learned about the number's significance in marijuana culture and thought his girlfriend would find it funny, which admittedly is not a great reason to pick a price." End quote. However, the price was never discussed with any potential investor who ostensibly would need to know what they're getting themselves into before agreeing to such a transaction. Next up is the lack of specific details of the potential go-private transaction, meaning that the statement of funding secured was misleading. On July 31st, Elon had a meeting with the Saudi Sovereign Investment Fund, in which going private was discussed, as it had been in the past on another occasion. The complaint then goes on to say, quote, "According to Musk, at the close of the July 31st meeting, the lead representative of the fund asked Musk to tell the fund how he wanted to do a go-private transaction and represented that so long as terms were reasonable, the fund would be fine with them. Musk acknowledged that no specific deal terms had been established at the meeting and that there was no discussion of what would or would not be considered reasonable." End quote. Moving on, Elon made several assumptions that were not true regarding bringing individual investors along for the ride. While he cited SpaceX's structure for handling its investors, it doesn't work as he'd hoped for both institutional and small retail investors. The first and largest issue are the institutional investors. Multiple institutional investors lamented that they'd no longer be able to invest in the company due to internal controls on how much these houses can invest in private funds. On the flip side, the Financial Council informed Elon that the ability to keep retail investors invested in the stock would be problematic. Lastly, and really the most open and shut part of this, is the failure to notify NASDAQ properly of an incoming material information announcement. NASDAQ rules say that any announcement of this kind requires NASDAQ to be notified at least 10 minutes in advance. As a result of these allegations, the SEC is seeking to remove Elon as CEO and as a member of the Tesla board. For Elon's part, he's issued the following statement, quote, "This unjustified action by the SEC leaves me deeply saddened and disappointed. I have always taken action in the best interests of truth, transparency, and investors. Integrity is the most important value in my life, and the facts will show I never compromised this in any way," end quote. CNBC reports that Tesla's board has also issued a statement in support of Elon, saying, quote, "Tesla and the board of directors are fully confident in Elon, his integrity, and his leadership of the company, which has resulted in the most successful U.S. auto company in over a century. Our focus remains on the continued ramp of Model 3 production and delivering for our customers, shareholders, and employees," end quote. So here are my thoughts on this. As I'd already tweeted, I think this looks pretty bad. On the surface, to me, this is all about timing and specificity with the SEC, and at least as the complaint is laid out, the SEC seems to have a really solid case. Elon never had proper discussions with potential investors about the price to be offered to shareholders. At least according to the evidence in the complaint, even up until the thought of going private was walked back, no potential investor was ever approached about what the go-private price should be. Next up is the funding secured statement. The contention is that the fund told Musk that any offer with reasonable terms would be fine. The problem is, for the purposes of securities trading, that looks to be way too vague a statement. My reasonable, your reasonable, Elon's reasonable, and the fund's reasonable may very well be all different things. Therefore, funding wasn't truly secured. So next up is the institutional and retail investor issue. Clearly, Elon was unaware of the rules governing institutional investors, as well as unaware of how retail investors could join the new private Tesla. And lastly, NASDAQ was never notified of potential material information being disseminated. Again, not being a lawyer, I think we have 3 key hopes as fans of Elon and the company. Firstly, whether or not these allegations are severe enough to warrant his removal as chairman and CEO. It would be a stunning revelation if he were removed from the company, and frankly, I believe the end of the company. You need only look at Apple's stagnation post-Steve Jobs to see what happens when a visionary company loses its visionary leader. Secondly, is that Elon's actions clearly were not intended to harm anyone. In fact, quite the opposite. He believed that he was being super transparent and forthcoming about potential changes in the company. Such is the double-edged sword of Elon. Sometimes you get a guy that sleeps on the factory floor, suffering along with his line workers because he feels it's the right thing to do, and other times you get a guy that just says things on Twitter that he certainly now wishes someone else had first reviewed. The last hope comes in the form of a deal not taken. The Tesla show reported via the Wall Street Journal, quote, "The SEC had crafted a settlement with Mr. Musk, approved by the agency's commissioners, that it was preparing to file Thursday morning when Mr. Musk's lawyers called to tell the SEC lawyers in San Francisco that they were no longer interested in proceeding with the agreement," end quote. That's a bold move, and I'm sure it's only one that they would make if they had supreme confidence, since much is at stake if it fails. I'd love to know what that original deal was, as if it was anything remotely reasonable, I'd have thought they'd jump on it just to have this behind them, as they have with other civil suits. So, as I said earlier on Twitter, I may be in the minority thinking that Elon may be in some serious trouble on this one. But friends, I will never BS you. You'll definitely get my honest opinion, regardless of if I believe the news is good or not. Check out the links to sources of this story in the description of the show. While you're at it, please consider supporting the show financially through Patreon at patreon.com/Tesla Tidbits. Thanks as always to our super patrons supporting the show at the $10 plus level. They are John Waltower, Drew Schuyler, John Waller, Mark and Sarah Thomas, Ryan Scarborough, Lee Sweet, William Henry Crew III, Dory and Steve Guberman, Bruno Quindici, Joey Boots, Ralph and Cheryl Waterhouse, Adam Raymer Brown, Megawatt Photovoltaic Development, Todd Sullivan, Robert Healy, Mitch Long, Zortec LED Canada, Morvan Ogg, Blake Thompson, Raymond and Deborah Malkowitz, T Sportline, Michael Pastroni, and Travis and Cheyenne Rush. If you're looking to purchase a Model S, Model X, or Model 3 Performance, you can enjoy free supercharging for the life of the vehicle if you purchase an inventory vehicle, and hook me up with some Tesla swag if you use the referral link ts.la/Jim50888 to purchase that vehicle. If you purchase a non-inventory vehicle, you can still get $100 in supercharging credit and still hook me up with that swag. If you can't support with dollars, feel free to leave a positive review for the show instead. If you have feedback for me, the best way to be heard is to tweet at Tesla Tidbits. And folks, this is a pretty big topic, so feel free to let me have at it, and maybe the next show I'll have a bunch of your guys' feedback on it. Use that hashtag AskTeslaTidbits if you'd like your comment or question to be considered for the show. I'll see everyone back here again on Monday. That's a long time after this bombshell dropped. But until then, keep it charged and hit the road.